Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about one of my favorite comic book characters of all time, because it's Wednesday, and every Wednesday it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. I'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And the great character I'm talking about today is a character I've talked about before a couple of times, and that would be Hellboy. Hellboy. I have mentioned Hellboy a couple times on Epic Comic Book Wednesday. But unlike on those previous occasions where I talked about a specific Hellboy story, today we're talking about the whole Hellboy story. We're talking about the whole Hellboy saga. Because the Hellboy stories do all tell basically one giant story. They tell the story of Hellboy and his life. Well, they tell the story of his birth, his life, his death, and his afterlife. He has an afterlife because he's a demon. And if you're a demon, I guess you're guaranteed an afterlife. It's an afterlife in hell, but what do you do? Fantastic character created by Mike Mignola and published by Dark Horse Comics. Hellboy was so popular that he has spawned an entire universe of other characters. So there have been a lot of comic books that have existed in Hellboy's world. It's been dubbed the Mignolaverse. All of these characters and concepts created by Mike Mignola. A lot of the comic books are written by Mike Mignola. Most of them illustrated by other people. But Hellboy is the first and greatest of these. Hellboy, who is a paranormal investigator, the greatest paranormal investigator of all time, the greatest of all occult detectives. He worked for the BPRD, the Bureau for Paranormal Research and Defense. And he worked for them for years and years, decades, and then quit and went off on his own and did his own thing for a while. And then became King of England. It all makes sense. It all makes sense if you read the Hellboy comics. Well, most of it makes sense anyway. It's magnificent. It's Hellboy. And the artwork is just dynamite. Mignola is a wonderful, wonderful artist. And he has this fabulous, moody artwork which is just uniquely his own. And Hellboy, a demon from hell, who was snatched from hell through an experiment when he was just a wee little child and transported to Earth, where he was raised by the U.S. Army and a very kind scientist. And so he grew up surrounded by human beings, decent human beings. And so he became a decent demon. I thought of doing this topic on Halloween, because on Halloween I got this. This is monster-sized Hellboy. This monster-sized thing is monster-sized Hellboy, and it's gigantic. It's over 1,500 pages long. The dimensions of this are quite huge, so it's much bigger than a Marvel or a DC Comics omnibus. Just a massive hardcover, which contains all of the main storylines in Hellboy. So if you want to know Hellboy's story from beginning to end, you can read this if you can lift it, Not the most convenient way to read Hellboy's stories, although it is really, really, really awesome, and I love it. But not the most convenient way, I suppose, to read Hellboy. Fortunately, you have options. So Hellboy originally came out in different miniseries. There'd be Seed of Destruction, and then there'd be a bunch of other miniseries after that, and then there'd be different short stories that would pop up in different publications. So he's never had like just one Hellboy comic book. It's always these different series. And these were reprinted in slim trade paperbacks. And then more recently, a few years ago, they were reprinted in these fat trade paperbacks. And they call them, Dark Horse calls them omnibuses, although they're not really omnibuses, they're just fat trade paperbacks. This is basically a Marvel Epic collection for Hellboy. And it's fantastic. This is the first one. There are 4 omnibus volumes, or fat trade paperbacks. And this is the first one. This is Seed of Destruction. And then you've got volume 2, you've got Strange Places. Then you've got volume 3, The Wild Hunt. This is where Hellboy becomes King of England. It all makes sense. It doesn't end well for Hellboy in that volume, though. And you realize that in volume 4, when it's Hellboy in Hell. Hellboy goes to hell. What happened? What do you do? He is a demon. So Hellboy in Hell. And this concludes Hellboy's saga. It is a little bit more complicated than that, but basically, this bunch of books tells a complete epic story, the epic story of Hellboy. And these 4 paperbacks, they are what is reprinted in monster-sized Hellboy. So if you have those, you don't need this. But of course you need this. Look at it. Why wouldn't you need that? But that isn't the entirety of Hellboy's story, of course. There are a couple other fat trade omnibus paperbacks from Dark Horse. These are the complete short stories. So this is the complete short stories volume 1 and the complete short stories volume 2. So these stories in these 2 volumes, shorter stories that you don't necessarily need to read to, get the whole of Hellboy's main saga. Although this is great stuff, and some of my favorite Hellboy stories are in these volumes. A lot of the artwork in these is not done by Mignola, but some of the stories, the artwork is done by Mignola. But some of the stories in these volumes, they're some of the best, I think. They're some of my favorites. Now, through the course of the series of books, not all the artwork was done by Mignola. Some of the artwork was done by Richard Corbin. See if I could find some Richard Corbin artwork. Can I find some? I know there's some Richard Corbin in here. Here it is. And Corbin's work, Corbin is one of those artists that people either really, really like or just can't stand. I really like Richard Corbin's artwork. I'm not exactly sure why, but I do like Corbin quite a bit. And I think he does some things he just can't do, but I think he does really well on anything horror or weird. Anything horror related or any kind of weird stories, he's really good. And I think he does well on Hellboy. He just has that kind of style that either you like it or you don't. My favorite Hellboy artist who isn't Mike Mignola is Duncan Fegredo. And everything in the 3rd trade paperback, or this third massive trade paperback, The Wild Hunt, everything in here, the artwork is done by Fegredo. And he is really, really good. So if you're good, like I said, he's my favorite Hellboy artist who isn't Mignola. And he has his own unique style. Because Mignola created the characters and the world, there's a lot of Mignola in the artwork in Fegredo's Hellboy, but he really has his own style to it. And he's really, really good. It's just great stuff. So if you read a Hellboy comic, the artwork is probably going to be great. And he's such a cool character, Hellboy. He's kind of a blue-collar guy as far as how he speaks. He's based, how Hellboy talks is based on Mignola's father. And so Hellboy has developed a very cool personality in the comic books. didn't get that. It wasn't quite there in the first Hellboy story, but right away, as soon as Mignola, John Byrne helped Mignola in the first Hellboy story, but after that, when Mignola started writing it himself, you really saw Hellboy's personality shine through. Hellboy, who is incredibly durable and is always fighting monsters and is always getting beat up. I mean, always getting in these huge battles where he gets burned and stabbed and everything else. But he always, he just shrugs it off because he's Hellboy. This is another way to read Hellboy. This is Hellboy Volume 1 in the library editions of Hellboy. There are 7 of these, I believe. And this has all of the original trade paperbacks just reprinted as they were originally published. And it's really nice. This is much easier to handle than monster-sized Hellboy. But you do get, the oversized pages and just a really beautiful way to read this series. It's the most expensive way to read this series if you want to get all the 7 volumes. But it's magnificent. So, yeah, you can get these too, the library editions. But where was I? I was talking about Hellboy and his personality and just how cool he was. A fun thing about Hellboy is that, unlike the movies, if you saw that first Hellboy movie, you might remember that Hellboy, he wasn't known publicly in the film, the first film. He was kind of an urban legend. Nobody really knew who Hellboy was. That's completely different in the comics. Everybody knows who Hellboy is in the comic books. And so you have this big, massive demon show up to places and people are just like, oh, look, hey, how you doing? I mean, nobody is surprised. Even if they've never seen Hellboy before, he shows up and it's just like, hey, how you doing? Nobody reacts at all. It's just like anybody else, except it's a giant demon. Oh, hey, it's Hellboy. How you doing, man? Which I always thought was funny. He has a friend, Hellboy does, Abe Sapien, who is a merman. He's like the creature from the Black Lagoon kind of, he swims around. That's what he does. He swims. But he's also an agent of the BPRD. And in the very first adventure, I'll see if I could find it because it was funny. In the very first adventure, they show up at this mansion for a case, and Abe Sapien is in disguise. And he's in disguise because I guess he's just such a horrible looking monster that they don't want him to be frightening. Yeah, so there's Abe Sapien in the center there in disguise. But you'll notice that Hellboy is just hanging out as Hellboy. And so you gotta disguise the merman. But Hellboy, the giant demon, no one cares about him. He's just, it's just Hellboy. And this comic book's full of cool stuff like that. Mignola had a lot of influences for the writing of the Hellboy saga. You'll find a lot of Lovecraft in this. There are Lovecraftian monsters everywhere. And you could argue that a lot of the main themes in this are Lovecraftian. But he took a lot from other things as well. He took a lot from folklore. Mignola's very interested in folklore and mythology. So there's a lot of folklore and mythology in here too. Storylines, stories, characters, all kinds of stuff is mixed in the Hellboy saga. And it's just fascinating. And it's just really interesting how it's done. And how it kind of resolved itself into one story. I remember when I first found out that Hellboy was going to die. Spoiler alert. Hellboy dies. But don't worry, he comes back and goes to hell. And I was really surprised. I was kind of surprised in the direction that this story took, where you would have a character who died and went to hell. It makes sense because it's Hellboy. Now, it is a little bit more complicated than that, than it all just being one saga, because of course Hellboy comics are still being printed. And there are new Hellboy comics coming out. And in fact, after Hellboy went to hell, he did come back to life. You know, if you're a comic book character, you've got to do that at least once, I guess. He came back in, not his own series, he came back in a BPRD series called The Devil You Know. The Mignolaverse, this whole universe that Mignola created, was all heading towards one kind of shattering conclusion. And I guess they felt that Hellboy needed to be a part of that. And so Hellboy was brought back to life just so he could take part in this miniseries and the conclusion of this miniseries, which I am not happy with. I thought it was an unnecessary thing to do, I think. I'm not particularly thrilled with the way the Mignolaverse kind of wrapped up. And you'll think, well, and it did end in kind of a Elric Stormbringer Beneath the Planet of the Apes kind of way, where it's like, well, I guess that's it, right? Where do you take it after this? And so a lot of the newer Hellboy stories that are coming out, or that you'll see, they all take place earlier in Hellboy's life. Because Hellboy was around for decades, you know, from the 50s, when he first was on the scene as an adult Hellboy. You'll find some adventures of little kid Hellboy before that, but he's, you know, through the 50s up through the early 2000s, I guess, Hellboy was running around having adventures. And so every time you have a new Hellboy comic, it has to take place somewhere in his earlier lifetime. Which is fine. There's plenty of room for that. But all of those stories have to conform to the Hellboy saga that was already told. And it does work, I think, very well as one big saga. It's really interesting. It's a story of a demon who has a destiny, but he doesn't want that destiny. And so he's trying to forge an identity for himself. That's what the story is. It's Hellboy saying, you know, screw you, destiny. I'm going to be who I want to be. That's what the story is. And it's a great one. I'll shut up now. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.